The crack of a rifle echoed through the Montana foothills as Virgil Eastwood tracked a wounded deer in the fading twilight of 1878, unaware that this autumn evening would forever alter his solitary existence. The last crimson rays of sunlight stretched across the grasslands as he followed the blood trail, his broad shoulders hunched against the growing chill, his weathered face set with determination beneath his worn Stetson. Virgil had been riding since dawn, having left his small ranch to hunt for winter provisions. His cattle business was modest, but sufficient for a man who preferred the company of his horse and loyal cattle dog to the bustling noise of Helena, 20 miles to the east. At 32, he'd carved out a life of independence from the unforgiving land, a life that suited him after returning from the war with memories he'd rather forget. "Come on, Rusty," he called to his red heifer dog who trotted ahead, nose to the ground. "Find that deer before dark, boy." The blood trail led toward his property line, and Virgil frowned. He'd have to hurry if he wanted to retrieve his kill before full darkness. As the trees thickened, Rusty suddenly darted ahead, disappearing into the gathering shadows. Virgil quickened his pace, following the sound of his dog's excited barking. "Rusty, heel," he commanded, concerned the dog might have encountered a bear or mountain lion. When he finally caught up, Virgil found Rusty standing at the entrance to his barn, tail wagging frantically. The deer forgotten, Virgil approached cautiously, his hand moving instinctively to the Colt revolver on his hip. Something had Rusty excited, and it wasn't the wounded deer. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, pulling his revolver as he approached. Entering the barn, Virgil struck a match against the doorframe, lighting a lantern that hung nearby. As the warm glow filled the space, his breath caught in his throat. There, nestled in the hay beside where Rusty usually slept, was a woman. Her dark hair spilled across the straw like a curtain of midnight, her form curled protectively around herself. Her dress, once fine by the looks of it, was torn and mudded, her boots worn through at the soles. Even in sleep, her face held tension, brows drawn together as though she battled demons even in her dreams. Virgil holstered his gun and knelt beside her, uncertain whether to wake her or let her rest. Before he could decide, Rusty approached and gently nuzzled her hand. The woman's eyes flew open, eyes the color of summer storm clouds wide with terror. She bolted upright, pressing herself against the barn wall, her gaze darting wildly between Virgil and the door. "Please," she whispered, tears immediately filling those storm-gray eyes. "Don't take me back. I'll die before I go back." Her voice broke on the last word, a barely controlled sob escaping her lips. Virgil raised his hands slowly, the way he might approach a spooked horse. "I'm not taking you anywhere, madam. This is my barn you're in. My name's Virgil Eastwood. This here's my property." The woman's shoulders remained tense, her breathing rapid and shallow. Rusty, seeming to sense her distress, laid his head in her lap. To Virgil's surprise, her trembling fingers found the dog's ears, stroking them gently. "He likes you," Virgil observed quietly. "Rusty doesn't take to strangers much." A flash of something, perhaps the ghost of a smile, crossed her face before disappearing. "Dogs are better judges of character than people," she whispered. "Can't argue with that," Virgil replied. "Might I know your name, madam?" She hesitated, eyes darting toward the barn door again. "Zara," she finally said. "Zara Valente." "Well, Miss Valente, it's getting cold out here. Whatever you're running from, it won't help if you catch your death in my barn." He stood slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. "I've got a cabin not far from here. Food, fire, and I can offer you the bed while I take the chair." She stared at him, weighing his words against whatever fear drove her. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Virgil considered this. Indeed, why was he offering shelter to a stranger? A woman who clearly carried trouble with her. But something in those haunted eyes spoke to him, reminded him of his own reflection after Shiloh. "Out here, we help when we can," he said simply. "Winter's coming. Questions can wait till morning." Zara looked down at Rusty, who wagged his tail in apparent agreement. Finally, she nodded, though wariness remained etched in every line of her body. "I don't have much strength to walk far," she admitted. "The cabin's just over the rise. I can carry you if need be." "No." The word came sharply, followed by a softer, "No, thank you. I can walk with assistance." Virgil nodded, respecting her boundaries. He offered his arm instead, which after a moment's hesitation she accepted. Her fingers were ice cold against his sleeve, and he noticed a bruise darkening her wrist where her sleeve pulled back. The short walk to his cabin seemed to drain what little energy she had. By the time they reached his door, she was leaning heavily against him, her breathing labored. Inside, the cabin was simple but well-maintained, a main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, a wooden table with 2 chairs, and a door leading to a single bedroom. Virgil guided her to a chair by the cold hearth and quickly set about building a fire. Rusty stationed himself at Zara's feet, his usual aloofness replaced by protective vigilance. "When's the last time you ate?" Virgil asked, noting how her cheekbones stood out sharply in her pale face. "Yesterday morning," she admitted. "I had some berries I found along the creek." Virgil didn't comment on the foolishness of eating unidentified berries, but made a mental note to watch for signs of poisoning. He moved to his small pantry, retrieving dried venison, beans, and cornmeal. Within minutes, he had a pot of beans simmering and corn cakes cooking on the cast iron skillet. As warmth from the fire filled the cabin, some color returned to Zara's cheeks. When he set a plate before her, she stared at it momentarily before picking up the fork with trembling fingers. "Eat slowly," he advised. "Your stomach won't take kindly to too much at once." She nodded and took small, deliberate bites. Virgil sat across from her, drinking coffee and trying not to stare. Now that she was in better light, he could see she was likely in her mid-20s. Beneath the dirt and exhaustion was a striking woman with delicate features that spoke of refined breeding, not someone accustomed to sleeping in barns or foraging for food. "Thank you," she said after finishing half her plate. "I can't remember food ever tasting so good." "Hunger's the best seasoning," Virgil replied with a slight smile. "There's more when you're ready." She set down her fork, her eyes meeting his directly for the first time. "Why aren't you asking me questions about who I am or what I'm running from?" Virgil took a sip of his coffee. "Figure you'll tell me when you're ready, or you won't. Either way, you needed help tonight and I could give it. Most men would demand answers, or worse. I'm not most men, Miss Valente." He stood and collected her plate. "The bedroom's through there. Lock the door if it makes you feel safer." "I'll be out here." Something like surprise crossed her features. "You're truly giving me your bed? My ma would haunt me till kingdom come if I let a lady sleep on the floor while I took the bed," he said seriously. A small, genuine smile touched her lips then, transforming her face in a way that made Virgil's heart skip unexpectedly. "She raised you well, your mother." "That she did, God rest her soul." He gestured toward the bedroom. "There's water in the pitcher if you want to wash up." And he hesitated, then went to a trunk in the corner, pulling out a clean shirt and pair of trousers. "These might be big, but they're clean. You can sleep in them if you'd like." Zara accepted the clothes with careful hands. "You're a rare kind of man, Mr. Eastwood." "Virgil," he corrected. "And out here, kindness isn't rare. It's necessary." She nodded, clutching the clothes to her chest as she made her way to the bedroom. The door closed softly behind her, and a moment later he heard the latch slide into place. Virgil exhaled slowly, wondering what he'd gotten himself into. Rusty looked up at him with soulful eyes. "Don't you start," Virgil muttered to the dog. "She needed help, that's all." But as he settled into his chair by the fire, rifle across his lap, just in case whoever she was running from came looking, Virgil couldn't shake the feeling that Zara Valente was about to change everything about his carefully constructed solitude. Morning light filtered through the cabin's small windows when Virgil woke, stiff from sleeping upright in the chair. For a moment, he wondered if he'd dreamed the woman in his barn, but then Rusty raised his head from his position guarding the bedroom door, and reality settled back in. Virgil stretched, working out the kinks in his neck, and quietly moved to stoke the fire and put coffee on to boil. The wounded deer he'd been tracking would be lost now, the meat spoiled or claimed by predators. He'd need to hunt again soon. A soft sound from the bedroom caught his attention. He turned to find Zara standing in the doorway, dressed in his clothes, which indeed swallowed her smaller frame. She'd tied a piece of rope around the waist of the trousers to keep them up and rolled the sleeves of his shirt. Her face was clean now, her dark hair pulled back, revealing a fading bruise along her jawline that made Virgil's gut tighten with anger. "Good morning," she said softly. "I hope I didn't sleep too late." "No such thing as sleeping late on a ranch," he replied, keeping his tone casual despite the questions burning in his mind about that bruise. "Coffee's almost ready." She nodded, then gestured to her borrowed attire. "Thank you for the clothes. I washed my dress as best I could." "It's hanging in the bedroom. You're welcome to them as long as you need." He poured 2 cups of coffee once it was ready, handing one to her. "How do you take it?" "Black is fine," she said, accepting the cup with both hands, seeming to savor the warmth. They sat at the table, an awkward silence stretching between them. Rusty broke the tension by placing his head in Zara's lap, earning a genuine smile and gentle pat. "He doesn't usually take to strangers," Virgil commented. "Animals sense things," she replied, stroking Rusty's ears. "When I was little, my father said dogs can see into your soul." Her expression clouded. He was right about that, at least. Virgil waited, sensing she was gathering courage. "You deserve to know who you've brought into your home," she finally said, staring into her coffee. "My name is truly Zara Valente. I am married to Maxwell Burton, a cattle baron from Colorado Territory." Virgil's eyebrows rose slightly. Even he had heard of the Burton name, though he paid little attention to the dealings of wealthy ranchers. "We married 3 years ago," she continued, her voice growing distant. "I was 21, naive, impressed by his wealth and status. My father was a physician with gambling debts. Maxwell offered to clear them in exchange for my hand." She laughed bitterly. "A simple transaction." Virgil remained silent, allowing her to tell her story at her own pace. At first, he was charming, generous even, but after the wedding, her fingers unconsciously touched the bruise on her jaw. "The first time was after a dinner party. I spoke too freely with one of his business associates. He waited until we were alone, then showed me exactly how he expected his wife to behave." Virgil's hands tightened around his cup. "No man has the right to strike his wife." Her eyes met his, filled with a weary knowledge. "The law says otherwise, Mr. Eastwood. A husband may discipline his wife as he sees fit." She took a shaky breath. "For 3 years I tried to be what he wanted, to speak less, need less, exist less, but nothing was ever enough." "So you ran," Virgil supplied. She nodded. 2 weeks ago I learned I was with child." Her hand moved protectively to her still flat stomach, and Virgil felt a new understanding dawn. "That night, Maxwell came home in a rage over a failed business deal. He'd been drinking heavily. The beating was worse than before. I feared for the baby." Tears welled in her eyes but didn't fall. "When he finally passed out, I took what money I could find and fled. I've been traveling on foot mostly, hiding during the day, moving at night. Your barn was the first real shelter I'd found in days. And he's looking for you," Virgil stated rather than asked. "Yes." Her voice was barely audible. "He has men working for him, hunters. They'll track me down eventually. Maxwell won't allow me to leave him, especially not carrying his heir." Virgil sat back, processing her story. If even half of what she said was true, the woman before him had endured more than anyone should have to bear. And now she carried a child, on the run from a powerful, violent man. "You can stay here," he found himself saying, "at least until you decide what to do next." Surprise flashed across her face. "You'd risk harboring a fugitive wife. Maxwell has connections with judges, lawmen. My ranch, my rules," Virgil replied simply. "Besides, this land's pretty isolated, not many visitors." Zara studied him, confusion evident in her gaze. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Virgil considered his answer carefully. "During the war, I saw too many people look away when others needed help. Swore I wouldn't be one of them." He paused. "And Rusty's already decided you belong here, so arguing would be pointless." A small, tentative smile touched her lips. "He is rather persuasive." "Stubborn is the word," Virgil corrected with a slight grin. "Now, how about some breakfast? Then I can show you around the place." For the next week, they settled into an uneasy rhythm. Virgil showed Zara the workings of his small ranch, the cattle grazing on the autumn gold pastures, the vegetable garden nearly done for the season, the chicken coop, where a dozen hens provided eggs. She proved a quick learner and eager to help, despite his insistence that she rest for the sake of her condition. "I've been idle too long under Maxwell's roof," she told him on the third day, arms deep in bread dough. He preferred a decorative wife, not a useful one. "His loss," Virgil remarked, watching as she kneaded with surprising strength. "You've got a talent with that dough." A blush colored her cheeks at the compliment. "Our cook used to let me help in the kitchen when Maxwell was away, said I had a natural touch." By the end of the week, Zara had transformed Virgil's functional but sparse cabin. The floors gleamed from scrubbing, curtains made from old flour sacks hung at the windows, and the scent of fresh bread and stews replaced the bachelor aroma of coffee and leather. More remarkable to Virgil was the transformation in Zara herself. Though still cautious, jumping at unexpected sounds and watching the road with wary eyes, she began to stand straighter. Her voice grew stronger, her rare smiles lasting longer. Sometimes, he caught her humming as she worked, a soft, sweet sound that stirred something long dormant in his chest. On the 8th evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Rusty sprawled contentedly between them. Virgil finally asked the question that had been on his mind. "What will you do when the baby comes?" Zara's hands stilled on the shirt she was mending, one of his that had seen better days. "I don't know," she admitted. "I had no plan beyond escape, perhaps find work in a town far from here, somewhere Maxwell wouldn't think to look." "A woman alone with a child," Virgil said thoughtfully. "It would be difficult, I know." She resumed her stitching. "But better difficult than dangerous." Virgil watched the firelight play across her features, highlighting the determination in her profile. "You're welcome to stay here," he said quietly. "Until after the birth, at least. This land's remote enough, might be safer than a town where news travels." Zara looked up, her needle poised mid-air. "You barely know me." "I know enough," he replied simply. Their eyes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Zara was the first to look away, her cheeks flushed. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." That night, as Virgil bedded down on his makeshift pallet near the hearth, having insisted Zara continue using the bedroom despite her protests, he wondered at the strange turn his life had taken. 2 weeks ago, he'd been content with his solitary existence, convinced it was all he needed or wanted. Now, the thought of Zara eventually leaving filled him with a hollow ache he couldn't quite name. The next morning dawned cold and clear, frost silvering the grass outside the cabin window. Virgil rose early as usual, banking the fire and starting coffee before heading out to tend the livestock. When he returned, cheeks ruddy from the chill, he found Zara at the stove, frying slices of salt pork and stirring a pot of bubbling oatmeal. "You didn't have to get up so early," he said, stamping his boots clean at the door. "The baby seems to think dawn is the perfect time for movement," she replied with a small smile, one hand resting briefly on her stomach. "Besides, I enjoy the quiet morning hours." They ate breakfast together, discussing the day's chores. Virgil mentioned riding into town for supplies, hesitating when he saw worry flicker across Zara's face. "I'll be fine here," she assured him, though her voice wavered slightly. "The cabin's secure." "I won't be gone long," he promised. 4 hours at most. Rusty will stay with you." The dog's ears perked up at the mention of his name, and Zara's tension eased somewhat. "We'll manage just fine, won't we, boy?" As Virgil prepared to leave, saddling his horse and checking his rifle, an unexpected impulse seized him. He returned to the cabin doorway where Zara stood, Rusty at her side. "If anyone comes," he said seriously, "use this." He pressed his spare revolver into her hand. "You know how to shoot." "My father taught me years ago," she replied, accepting the weapon with steady hands. "Good." He paused, then added awkwardly, "Take care." "You too," she said softly. The ride to Helena took longer than usual, Virgil pushing his horse to make good time despite the muddy road. In town, he moved efficiently through his errands, purchasing flour, sugar, coffee, and other staples. At the general store, he hesitated before adding a bolt of soft blue calico fabric to his order. "Something special, Eastwood?" the shopkeeper, Franklin, asked with raised eyebrows. "Don't usually see you buying ladies' goods." "Just some mending needs doing," Virgil replied evasively. Franklin nodded, though his expression remained curious. Been a while since we've seen you in town. Everything all right out your way, just busy with winter preparations, Virgil said, paying for his purchases. As he loaded his supplies onto his pack horse, a conversation from the nearby saloon caught his attention. Two rough-looking men he didn't recognize were speaking to the blacksmith, Jenkins. Looking for a woman, one was saying. Dark hair, gray eyes, might be pregnant, name's Zara Burton. Ran off from her husband down Colorado Way. Virgil froze, his hands stilling on the ropes securing his packages. Haven't seen anyone matching that description, Jenkins replied. Not many travelers this time of year anyway. Her husband's offering a $500 reward, the second man said. She took family heirlooms when she fled. Mr. Burton just wants his property returned. Virgil's jaw tightened at the word property. He secured the last of his supplies and mounted his horse, fighting the urge to ride straight home. Moving too hastily would only draw attention. Instead, he tipped his hat to Jenkins as he passed, maintaining a casual pace until he reached the edge of town. Once out of sight, he urged his horse into a gallop, anxiety gnawing at his gut. If Burton's men were in Helena, they'd soon be canvassing the surrounding ranches. He'd been a fool to leave Zara alone, even with Rusty for protection. The sun was past its zenith when Virgil finally crested the hill overlooking his property. Relief washed over him at the sight of smoke rising steadily from the cabin chimney. Nothing seemed amiss from this distance, but he wouldn't rest easy until he saw Zara safe with his own eyes. As he approached the cabin, Rusty's bark greeted him not his usual welcome but a warning sound that immediately set Virgil on alert. He dismounted quickly, drawing his rifle from its scabbard. "Zara," he called, approaching cautiously. The cabin door opened and Zara appeared, his revolver held firmly in her right hand. Her face was pale but composed, her eyes hard in a way he hadn't seen before. "There were men," she said without preamble. "Two of them. They came asking questions about an hour ago." Virgil climbed the porch steps, scanning the surrounding area. "Burton's men," she nodded, lowering the gun slightly. "They claimed to be looking for work, but I recognized one of them, Thorne. He's Maxwell's foreman. Did they see you?" "No. I hid in the root cellar when Rusty alerted me to riders approaching. They looked through the windows but didn't break in." Her voice remained steady, but Virgil could see the fine tremor in her hands. "They said they'd return to speak with the owner." Virgil cursed under his breath. "I saw two men in town asking about you, offering a reward." Fear flashed across her face. "Then they know I'm in this area." "They suspect," he corrected. "But they don't know for certain." He ushered her inside, securing the door behind them. Rusty paced anxiously by the window, a low growl rumbling in his throat. "We need to leave," Zara said, already moving to gather her few belongings. "I won't bring danger to your door, not after all you've done for me." Virgil caught her arm gently. "Wait. Running now might be exactly what they expect. They'll be watching the roads." "I can't stay, Virgil," she insisted, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Maxwell's men won't stop looking, and when they find me, they won't find you," he interrupted firmly. "Not if we're smart about this." She stared at him, conflict evident in her expression. "What do you suggest?" Virgil ran a hand through his hair, considering their options. "We have three choices as I see it. You can run and likely be caught. You can stay hidden here, which might work for a while but is risky. Or. She prompted when he hesitated. "Or we make it impossible for them to take you legally." Confusion crossed her face. "What do you mean, marriage?" he said simply. "If you were my wife, not Burton's, it would complicate things considerably." Zara's eyes widened. "That's absurd." "I'm already married." "Not in Montana territory, you're not," Virgil replied. "Not if there's no record of it here, and I'm betting Burton won't want to make a public claim that might expose why you really left him." She shook her head slowly. "You can't be serious." "You'd marry a stranger to protect her from her husband. You're hardly a stranger anymore, Zara," he said quietly. "And I'm not proposing this just to protect you, though that's reason enough." "Then why?" Virgil looked away, unaccustomed to voicing such personal thoughts. "Because in these past weeks, I've come to care for you, more than I expected to, more than I've cared for anyone in a long time." Silence fell between them, broken only by Rusty's continued low growling at the window. Zara's expression softened, surprise giving way to something warmer. "I never thought to find kindness again after Maxwell," she said softly. "Let alone." She trailed off, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on her stomach. "But the child would be raised as my own," Virgil finished, "if you'd allow it." Tears filled her eyes then. "Why would you do this? Take on another man's wife, another man's child." Virgil stepped closer, cautiously taking her hands in his. "Because some things are worth fighting for, Zara. Some people too." She looked up at him, searching his face. "This isn't how I imagined marriage would be. Built on necessity rather than it wouldn't just be necessity," he interrupted gently. "Not for me." Understanding dawned in her eyes, followed by a tentative hope that made his heart race. "Nor for me," she admitted in a whisper. Before he could respond, Rusty's growl deepened, his attention fixed on the window. Virgil moved quickly to look outside, spotting dust rising on the road riders approaching. "They're coming back," he said grimly, "and not alone this time." Zara's face paled. "What do we do?" Virgil checked his rifle, then handed Zara back the revolver. "We stand our ground. This is my property and you're under my protection." She squared her shoulders, a new determination replacing her fear. "I won't go back to him, Virgil. I'd rather die." "It won't come to that," he promised. "Stay inside. Let me handle this." Virgil stepped onto the porch as 4 riders approached his cabin. He recognized 2 of them from Town Burton's men. The other 2 were strangers, though one wore a deputy's badge that caught the afternoon sunlight. "Afternoon, gentlemen," Virgil called, his rifle held casually but visibly across his body. "Something I can help you with," the deputy, a thin man with a weathered face, nudged his horse forward. "Mr. Eastwood, I'm Deputy Hollies from Helena. These men have reason to believe you might be harboring a fugitive." "Is that so?" Virgil replied evenly. "No fugitives here, deputy, just me and my dog." One of Burton's men, a broad-shouldered individual with cold eyes, spoke up. "My men saw signs of a woman here earlier today, Mrs. Zara Burton, who absconded from her husband's home with valuable property." "That right?" Virgil shifted his weight, keeping his expression neutral. "Well, I can assure you there's no Mrs. Burton on my property. Mind if we take a look inside?" The deputy asked, though his tone suggested it wasn't really a question. "Actually, I do mind," Virgil replied. "Unless you have a warrant, this is private property." The broad-shouldered man, Thorne, Virgil presumed dismounted with a scowl. "We know she's here, Eastwood. Make this easy on yourself." Before Virgil could respond, the cabin door opened behind him. He turned, heart sinking, to see Zara step onto the porch, but instead of fear, her face showed only calm resolve. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice steady, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding, Mrs. Burton," Thorne said with a cold smile. "Your husband's been concerned for your welfare." "I'm sure he has," Zara replied, "but I'm afraid you're mistaken about my identity. My name is Mrs. Eastwood." Surprise registered on all the men's faces, none more so than the deputy's. "Madam, my wife and I were married last month," Virgil said, picking up the thread of her deception without missing a beat. "Quiet ceremony in but." Thorne's face darkened with suspicion. "That's a convenient claim." Mr. Burton described his wife in detail: dark hair, gray eyes, expecting a child. "I'm hardly the only dark-haired woman in Montana territory," Zara replied. "And yes, my husband and I are expecting our first child this spring." The deputy looked uncomfortable now, glancing between Zara and the increasingly angry Thorne. "Do you have proof of this marriage, Mrs. Eastwood?" "Our marriage certificate is with the county clerk in Butte," Virgil answered smoothly. "Feel free to verify it." "This is ridiculous," Thorne snapped. "She's lying. This is Zara Burton, and she's coming with us." He took a step toward the porch, and Virgil raised his rifle slightly. "That's far enough." The deputy held up his hand. "Hold on now, we don't want trouble." "Neither do we," Zara said, moving to stand beside Virgil. "But I will not be accosted on my own property based on mistaken identity." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then the deputy sighed, turning to Thorne. "Without a positive identification or a warrant, there's nothing more we can do today." "This is absurd," Thorne growled. "Mr. Burton won't be pleased." "Mr. Burton's pleasure is no concern of mine," the deputy replied firmly. Now we've disturbed these folks enough for one day. Thorne glared at Zara with naked hatred before finally mounting his horse. This isn't over, he warned. I believe it is, Virgil replied calmly. Good day, gentlemen. They watched in silence as the four riders departed, waiting until they disappeared from view before either spoke. That was a risk, Virgil said quietly. Coming out like that. No more risk than you've taken for me, Zara replied. She turned to face him, a new determination in her eyes. Did you mean what you said about marriage? Virgil nodded slowly. Every word. Then I accept, she said simply. Not just for protection or for the child, but because I've found something with you I never thought possible again. Trust, safety. She paused, her cheeks coloring slightly. And perhaps in time, love. Virgil's heart swelled at her words. Tentatively, he reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face. We'll need to make that marriage in but a reality, and soon. Today, if possible, she agreed with a small smile. What about Burton? He won't give up easily. Zara's smile faded, but her resolve remained. No, he won't, but neither will we. 2 days later, they stood before a justice of the peace in Helena, Virgil having decided that hiding their marriage would only create more problems. Better to establish the truth openly, creating a legal barrier between Zara and her past. Do you, Virgil James Eastwood, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? The justice asked solemnly. I do, Virgil replied, his eyes never leaving Zara's face. And do you, Zara Valente, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do, she answered, her voice clear and certain. As they exchanged simple gold bands purchased with the money Virgil had been saving for a new plow, Virgil felt a sense of rightness settle over him. What had begun as an act of kindness toward a stranger had become something he hadn't known he was missing. Outside the justice's office, Zara took Virgil's arm, her new wedding band catching the late autumn sunlight. Mrs. Eastwood, he said, testing the sound of it. It suits me better than my previous title ever did, she replied with a genuine smile. They rode home together, Rusty racing ahead of their horses, barking joyfully as if he understood the significance of the day. At the cabin, their home now, Virgil surprised Zara by lifting her from the saddle and carrying her across the threshold. I believe that's traditional, he said, setting her gently on her feet. There's nothing traditional about us, she laughed, the sound lighter than he'd ever heard from her. No, he agreed, but that doesn't make it any less real. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Zara working on a dress from the blue calico Virgil had purchased, she looked up suddenly. Do you think he'll come himself? Maxwell, Virgil considered this. Eventually, perhaps. Men like Burton don't surrender what they consider theirs. I'm not his, she said firmly. I never truly was. No, Virgil agreed. You're your own person, Zara. That's what he couldn't accept. She set aside her sewing and moved to sit beside him, leaning her head against his shoulder in a gesture of trust that humbled him. When he comes, she said quietly, we'll face him together. Together, Virgil agreed, his arm encircling her shoulders. Winter descended on Montana territory with a ferocity that seemed designed to protect them. Heavy snows blocked the mountain passes, isolating their small ranch from the outside world. In that cocoon of white, Zara's belly grew round with child, and their tentative affection deepened into something neither had expected to find by Christmas. They had settled into a rhythm of shared work and quiet evenings, learning each other's stories, dreams, and fears. Virgil spoke of the war, of the nightmares that still sometimes woke him. Zara shared memories of her childhood before her father's gambling had sold her future. In January, during a rare clear day, Virgil rode to Helena for supplies and returned with news. Burton's offering $1,000 now, he told Zara as they sat at dinner. The posters are all over town. Instead of fear, Zara's face showed only thoughtful consideration. He must be desperate to save face, a man of his standing, unable to control his wife. The deputy warned me he's hired a detective from Denver to track you down. She nodded slowly. Then we should prepare ourselves. I've been thinking, Virgil said carefully, maybe we should consider moving west to Oregon or Washington territory. Make a fresh start where Burton has less influence. Zara looked around the cabin that had become her haven. This is our home, Virgil. I won't be chased from it by fear. He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. Your courage constantly amazes me. It's not courage, she replied softly. It's having something worth fighting for. February brought thaws and freezes, the weather as unpredictable as their future. Zara's time grew closer, the child active beneath her heart. They prepared a cradle together, Virgil carving it from pine while Zara lined it with soft blankets. In early March, as the first signs of spring appeared on the mountainsides, riders approached their cabin once more. This time, there were only two: a well-dressed man with an immaculate beard and Thorn, his foreman. Virgil met them on the porch, rifle in hand. Zara stood in the doorway behind him, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. Mr. Burton, Virgil acknowledged coldly. You're trespassing on private property. Maxwell Burton surveyed the modest ranch with obvious disdain before his gaze settled on Zara. I've come for my wife, he stated flatly. You have no wife here, Virgil replied. Only mine. Burton's lip curled in contempt, a convenient fiction. Zara belongs to me legally and morally, as does the child she carries. The law in Montana Territory recognizes me as Virgil's wife, Zara spoke up, her voice steady despite the pallor of her face. Our marriage is registered and witnessed. A bigamous marriage has no standing, Burton snapped. You were my wife first and remain so under the law. A marriage obtained through coercion, maintained through violence, Zara countered. I have witnesses to the abuse I suffered at your hands, Maxwell, servants who saw the bruises, doctors who treated my injuries. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Burton's face. You wouldn't dare make such accusations public, he said, but his confidence had wavered. I would, Zara replied firmly, if you force my hand. Burton turned to Virgil, his expression hardening. And you? What kind of man takes another man's wife? His child. The kind who recognizes that women aren't property, Virgil answered evenly. The kind who values kindness over control. This is your final chance, Zara, Burton said, ignoring Virgil now. Return with me willingly and I'll forgive this. In discretion, the child will be raised as a Burton with all the advantages that entails. Zara stepped forward to stand beside Virgil, her hand finding his. I've seen what it means to be raised as a Burton, she said quietly. This child deserves better, as did I. Fury twisted Burton's features. You ungrateful, that's enough, Virgil interrupted, raising his rifle slightly. My wife has made her decision. I suggest you respect it and leave our property. For a tense moment, Virgil thought Burton might refuse. Then, with calculated precision, the cattle baron straightened his coat. This isn't over, he said coldly. The courts will hear of this. Perhaps they should, Zara replied, along with the authorities who might be interested in your business practices. I kept records, Maxwell, of the bribes, the land swindles, the threats against smaller ranchers. Burton's face drained of color. You're bluffing. Try me, she challenged, meeting his gaze without flinching. A silent battle of wills played out between them before Burton finally inclined his head slightly. Keep her Eastwood, and whatever mongrel she whelps. She's more trouble than she's worth. With that, he turned his horse and rode away, Thorn following reluctantly behind. As the dust settled, Zara's composure finally cracked. She sagged against Virgil, trembling with reaction. I didn't think he'd give up so easily. Men like Burton only fight when they think they can win, Virgil said, holding her close. You showed him he couldn't. She looked up at him, wonder in her eyes. It's over, truly over. I believe it is, he replied, though he resolved privately to remain vigilant. Men with wounded pride could be unpredictable. That night, as they lay together in the bed they now shared, Virgil placed his hand on Zara's rounded belly, feeling the strong kicks of the child within. Boy or girl, this little one is going to have your spirit, he said softly. And your kindness, she replied, covering his hand with hers. Your integrity. Virgil propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at the woman who had changed his life so completely. I never thought I'd find this, he admitted. After the war, I convinced myself solitude was enough. And now, she asked, her eyes reflecting the moonlight streaming through the window. Now I can't imagine returning to that emptiness, he said honestly. You and this child, you've given me a future I didn't know I wanted. Zara reached up to touch his face tenderly. You gave me back my life, Virgil Eastwood, my freedom, my hope. We gave those things to each other, he corrected gently. 2 weeks later, as a spring thunderstorm raged outside, their daughter was born, a strong-lunged, dark-haired girl they named Hope Liberty Eastwood. As Virgil held his daughter for the first time, marveling at her tiny, perfect features, he made her a silent promise. She would grow up knowing only love and security, never fear or ownership. That autumn, a year after Zara had first appeared in his barn, a letter arrived from Denver. Burton had died suddenly, a heart attack, the paper reported. His vast holdings were being divided among distant relatives, none of whom had any interest in pursuing claims against a woman who had once briefly been his wife. Are you relieved? Virgil asked as they stood together on the porch, watching Hope crawl determinedly after Rusty in the yard. Yes, Zara admitted, for Hope's sake more than my own. She leaned against his shoulder. But even if he had lived, even if he had continued to threaten us, I wouldn't have regretted my choice. Virgil wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. Nor would I. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Virgil reflected on how a single act of kindness, allowing a frightened woman and his loyal dog to share shelter on a cold autumn night, had transformed his world entirely. What had begun with fear and desperation had blossomed into a love deeper and more profound than either of them had dared to imagine. And as Hope laughed, reaching her arms up to be held, Virgil knew with absolute certainty that some journeys, no matter how difficult their beginning, led exactly where you were meant to be all along.